On the morning of June 10th, 2013, in the quiet neighborhood of Charleston, South Carolina, a chilling discovery shocked the community. A young husband's world was turned upside down when he uncovered a truth about his wife that would unravel into a deadly confrontation. What started as a seemingly happy marriage ended in bloodshed, leaving questions about identity, betrayal, and the lengths one would go to hide a secret. Jason Peterson was born and raised in the rural outskirts of Charleston, South Carolina. Growing up, he embodied the values of hard work and dedication, traits that had been passed down through generations in his family. His father had been a factory worker, while his mother managed the household. From an early age, Jason understood the importance of responsibility. By the time he was 18, Jason was already skilled with his hands, working construction jobs alongside his uncles during summers. It wasn't just a way to earn money, but a way to shape his future. He dreamed of starting his own construction business one day. Known for his honesty and reliability, Jason quickly gained respect within the local community. Despite his strong exterior, Jason was quiet, almost reserved. He never spoke much about his emotions. Instead, he poured himself into his work. Friends and family often noted how focused he was, always working towards something, whether it was a project on a job site or helping a neighbor with a repair. This single-minded dedication left little time for romance, and so, by his late 20s, Jason hadn't yet settled down. However, deep down, he longed for companionship, the kind of relationship that mirrored his parents, built on loyalty and hard work. In the summer of 2010, Jason's life took an unexpected turn. He met Lily at a mutual friend's barbecue. She was different from anyone he had met before, soft-spoken and gentle, yet with a quiet strength that drew him in. Lily's past was shrouded in mystery, but Jason didn't pry. She was private, often guarding details about her life before Charleston, which seemed to suit Jason just fine. He appreciated her kind nature, her ability to listen, and how she seemed to understand him without words. They found comfort in their shared silences, a bond that grew deeper as they spent more time together. Lily had her own story of resilience, though few knew it. Born in a small town in Georgia, Lily's journey to Charleston had been one of self-discovery and courage. In her early 20s, after years of feeling out of place in her own body, she made the decision to transition. The process was long and emotionally draining, but Lily was determined to live authentically. She left her hometown, severing ties with those who couldn't accept her, and sought a fresh start in Charleston. There, she built a quiet life for herself, working in an office job, keeping to herself, and slowly creating a new identity, one that allowed her to embrace who she truly was. She met few people who truly understood her, but that was enough for her. When Jason came into her life, Lily was cautious. She had learned that trust wasn't something to give freely, but something that needed to be earned. She feared that revealing her past would undo the happiness she had found. But with Jason, she felt safe. He wasn't overly curious about her past, and she didn't offer more than she thought necessary. Instead, they focused on the future. By 2011, their relationship grew serious. Jason introduced her to his friends and family, who found Lily charming but quiet. It wasn't long before Jason realized that he couldn't imagine his life without her. The couple's relationship was built on simplicity. They enjoyed long drives on the weekends, quiet dinners at home, and the occasional trip to the Charleston waterfront. Jason had saved enough to put a down payment on a modest house, and by the summer of 2012, they were married in a small, intimate ceremony. To those around them, it seemed like the perfect union. They moved into their new home, a cozy two-bedroom house in a quiet Charleston suburb. The neighborhood was close-knit, and the couple quickly became a part of the local fabric. Their married life, at first, was everything Jason had hoped for. He continued to work long hours, now with the goal of providing for their future family. They spoke often about children, about expanding their lives together. Lily, for her part, threw herself into the role of homemaker, always keeping the house in perfect order and offering support to Jason whenever he needed it. On the surface, life seemed perfect. But behind the peaceful facade, Lily carried the weight of her secret. She had undergone gender-affirming surgery in 2007, before she met Jason. Her transition had been a deeply personal journey, and by the time she settled in Charleston, she had put that chapter of her life behind her. However, with every passing day in her marriage, the fear of Jason discovering her past grew. She worried about what would happen if he ever found out, whether he would see her as the same woman he had fallen in love with. Lily loved Jason deeply, but the decision to keep this part of her life hidden was driven by the fear of rejection. As 2013 began, the couple's conversations shifted more towards starting a family. But for Lily, this brought new waves of anxiety. She knew that eventually she would have to face the truth. As Jason worked late nights, unaware of the inner turmoil consuming his wife, Lily found herself increasingly distant, retreating into herself. Still, she held on to the hope that they could continue to live peacefully, without her past coming to light. The secret, however, loomed over them, casting an invisible shadow on what seemed to be a perfect life. Jason, ever the hard-working and committed husband, didn't notice the growing tension. To him, their life was moving forward as planned. He had no idea that his wife was struggling with a secret that could shatter their world. On June the 7th, 2013, Jason called 911, claiming he had found his wife dead. When police arrived, they were greeted by a gruesome scene. Lily's body lay in the living room, covered in blood, with the murder weapon still nearby. Jason, disoriented and reeking of alcohol, insisted he had nothing to do with the murder. It all began on an ordinary morning on March 1st, 2013, when Jason Peterson decided to tackle the clutter in the attic. Spring was approaching, and he had promised Lily he would finally go through the boxes they had stacked away after their move. The quiet hum of the neighborhood buzzed outside their suburban Charleston home, but Jason was focused on the task at hand. As he sifted through old documents, photographs, and forgotten keepsakes, he came across a folder he didn't recognize. Inside were medical documents, yellowed with age, their contents revealing a life-changing truth about his wife. The papers detailed Lily's transition, from hormone therapy to gender-affirming surgery, dating back to 2005. Jason's heart raced as he scanned the documents, unable to make sense of what he was reading. He felt a rush of confusion, disbelief, and betrayal. The woman he thought he knew, the person he had married, had a past she had never shared with him, a past that had been hidden beneath layers of secrecy. The neat, orderly life they had built suddenly felt like a lie. That evening, Jason confronted Lily. She could see the shock and hurt in his eyes as he held the papers in his trembling hands. She knew this day might come, but she had hoped, prayed even, that it never would. The air between them was heavy with tension, as Jason demanded answers, needing to understand why she had kept such a crucial part of her life hidden from him. Lily struggled to explain, not because she didn't want to, but because no explanation seemed enough to soothe the pain in Jason's eyes. As the days passed, the weight of the revelation seeped into every corner of their home. Jason, who had always been steadfast and reliable, now felt like his world was unraveling. He couldn't reconcile the woman he had fallen in love with, the wife he had committed to, with the truth he had uncovered. Every interaction between them became strained. Conversations, once filled with warmth, turned cold and distant. Jason withdrew from his friends, finding it difficult to explain what was happening without feeling ashamed. He began missing social gatherings, avoiding questions about Lily, and shutting down when people asked how he was doing. Lily, for her part, felt the walls closing in. She had hoped they could work through this, that Jason would come to understand that she was still the same person. But his silence, the distance growing between them, spoke volumes. She knew he was struggling, but every attempt to bridge the gap seemed to push him further away. The once peaceful home was now filled with a suffocating tension, and Lily found herself retreating emotionally. She was no longer the confident woman she had been when they first married, but rather a person constantly on edge, walking on eggshells around the man she loved. The couple, who had once shared dreams of starting a family, now barely spoke. Each conversation ended in a fight, with emotions running high and wounds deepening. The love they had built was crumbling, and it seemed there was no way to piece it back together. By June 2013, the situation had reached a boiling point. Jason's emotional state had deteriorated rapidly over the past few months. The revelation of Lily's past had gnawed at him day after day, unraveling his sense of stability. He could no longer focus at work, finding it harder to get out of bed in the mornings, let alone face his coworkers. The thoughts of betrayal swirled constantly in his mind, clouding his judgment and leaving him isolated from the people he once relied on for support. He spent more time alone, drowning his confusion in alcohol, his anger bubbling just below the surface. On the evening of June 5th, 2013, everything exploded. It started as it had for the past few weeks, tense silence broken only by curt exchanges between the two. But that night, something snapped. Neighbors would later recall hearing the sounds of shouting, followed by the crash of objects being thrown. Jason had come home in a foul mood, his mind racing with everything that had gone wrong since discovering Lily's secret. Lily, desperate to hold on to what remained of their marriage, tried once again to make him understand that she was still the person he had married, that her past didn't change their love. But Jason, consumed by his confusion and anger, couldn't listen. The argument grew more heated, with emotions running higher than ever before. Lily's pleas were met with fury, Jason's frustration boiling over into rage. At that moment, it wasn't just about the secret anymore. It was about everything that had broken between them. He felt trapped in a life he no longer recognized, and Lily, the one person he had always trusted, now seemed like a stranger. Later that night, after the argument had subsided, Jason stormed out of the house. The cool night air did little to calm his nerves. Instead, he found himself at the local bar, drowning his sorrows in drink after drink. His thoughts were chaotic, his emotions too overwhelming to process. He couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, and the alcohol only fueled his anger. By the time he left the bar, he was heavily intoxicated and filled with a dark resolve. On June 6, 2013, in the early hours of the morning, Jason returned home. Lily was still awake, sitting in the living room, waiting for him to return. What began as another attempt to salvage their relationship quickly escalated into something far more dangerous. Jason, fueled by alcohol and months of pent-up anger, lashed out once again. But this time, the argument turned physical. In a moment of uncontrolled rage, Jason grabbed a kitchen knife. The details of what followed were brutal. Forensic reports would later show that Lily had been stabbed over 20 times. The attack was vicious, fueled by Jason's inability to process the truth about his wife's past. Blood spattered the walls, and the once quiet home became the scene of unimaginable violence. Lily's life ended that night, and with it, the life Jason had known. What had begun as a marriage filled with hope and promise had turned into a nightmare, leaving behind a tragedy that would haunt the community of Charleston for years to come. The morning of June 7th, 2013, began like any other in Charleston, South Carolina. However, for Jason Peterson, it was the start of a nightmare that would unravel his life. At 9:32 a.m., a call came into 911 from Jason, his voice shaky and frantic, claiming that he had found his wife dead in their home. The police arrived minutes later, greeted by a scene of unimaginable horror. Lily's body lay sprawled across the living room floor, her blood pooling beneath her, staining the once pristine carpet. The kitchen knife used in the attack was still on the floor nearby, its blade soaked in blood. It was clear that the murder had been violent, driven by rage. Forensic investigators were called in immediately, and they began methodically piecing together the sequence of events. Jason, still disoriented and smelling of alcohol from the night before, appeared confused. He insisted that he had nothing to do with the murder, but his story was riddled with inconsistencies. He claimed to have found her like that when he woke up, yet investigators quickly began to notice details that didn't add up. Blood spatter analysis showed signs of struggle, indicating that the attack had likely occurred in the early hours of the morning, shortly after Jason had returned home. Additionally, neighbors reported hearing shouting and crashes from the house the night before, consistent with the couple's growing tensions in recent months. By June 8, 2013, detectives had enough suspicion to bring Jason in for questioning. His emotional instability was obvious, and his behavior during the interrogation only further raised suspicions. He was erratic, unable to maintain eye contact, and he kept repeating details about his recent discovery of Lily's transition. The detectives pressed him, not because they were insensitive, but because they needed to understand the catalyst that had led to the tragic outcome. As they probed deeper, Jason finally broke down. He admitted that discovering Lily's gender identity had been the cause of their arguments, the betrayal he had felt, and the way it had made him question his entire marriage. However, he continued to deny any involvement in her murder. His confessions were more about his emotional turmoil than any direct admission of guilt. He spoke about feeling lost, about the confusion that had consumed him after realizing the life he had been living had been built on a secret. Yet despite these emotional admissions, he maintained his innocence. Forensic evidence was beginning to pile up. Security footage from a nearby liquor store placed Jason at the scene just hours before the murder, intoxicated and clearly agitated. Investigators also found traces of his fingerprints on the knife and his DNA under Lily's fingernails, suggesting she had tried to defend herself during the attack. By June the 20th, 2013, the police were ready to officially charge Jason with the murder of his wife. On July 2nd, 2013, Jason was formally arrested for the murder of Lily Peterson. The arrest sent fear and panic through the Charleston community, a place where violent crime was uncommon, and such a gruesome incident was unheard of. Local news outlets quickly picked up the story, fascinated by the complexity of the case. A newlywed husband, a hidden identity, and a tragic end. The trial, which began in early 2014, attracted widespread media attention. The courtroom was packed on the first day, with reporters eager to document every twist and turn. To the public, it wasn't just a murder trial. It was a story of betrayal, identity, and the dark consequences of hidden truths. Prosecutors were quick to build their case against Jason. They painted a picture of a man consumed by insecurity and rage after discovering his wife's past. They argued that Jason's emotional response to Lily's transition had been the driving force behind the brutal attack. Medical records were presented to show the timeline of Lily's transition, and police reports outlined the violent nature of her death. Forensic evidence tied Jason directly to the crime, leaving little room for doubt about his involvement. The most powerful piece of evidence came from Jason's own testimony. He took the stand in an attempt to explain his actions. He spoke about how the discovery had shattered him, how he felt like his world had been turned upside down. His words were raw, filled with emotion, but rather than earning him sympathy, they revealed the deep-seated anger he had harbored for months. He described feeling trapped in a lie, betrayed by the person he had committed his life to. And though he didn't admit to the murder directly, his words made it clear that he had been pushed to the edge. His defense attorney tried to present Jason as a man who had been overwhelmed by the emotional shock of the discovery. They argued that his mental state had been fragile, that the betrayal had unbalanced him to the point where he was no longer in control of his actions. But the jury wasn't swayed. The prosecution's narrative of a man who had allowed his insecurities to fuel a violent rage resonated more strongly. The trial lasted for several weeks, with testimonies from neighbors, forensic experts, and family members. Witnesses detailed the couple's tumultuous final months, describing the growing tension in the household and the emotional distance that had taken root between Jason and Lily. It was clear to everyone present that their marriage had unraveled long before that fateful night. On March 15th, 2014, after weeks of deliberation, the jury returned with a guilty verdict. Jason Peterson was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison. The case became infamous, with the media dubbing it the Charleston trans identity murder. It left a lingering question for many. How could a love story turn so violent, so tragic? As Jason was led away to begin his sentence, there were no words of relief. The case had torn apart lives, left a community in shock, and raised difficult questions about identity, acceptance, and the price of secrecy. For Jason, The sentence marked the end of one chapter of his life, but the beginning of a long road of reflection on the choices he had made and the life he had destroyed. For Lily, there would be no second chance. She was remembered not for the secret she had kept, but for the quiet, loving woman she had been. Someone who had sought happiness, but had paid the ultimate price for her truth. In the years following the trial, the Charleston community remained divided. Some saw Jason as a victim of deception, while others viewed him as a man unable to accept his wife's identity. The case sparked discussions about the complexities of gender identity, marriage, and the importance of honesty in relationships. To this day, the Peterson home remains empty, a chilling reminder of the dark secrets that can tear apart even the most seemingly perfect lives. Just like the case where a professor gets murdered after affair with transgender student gets discovered. This case was another one where secrets ended up destroying the lives of people and ultimately taking the life of someone. Don't forget to check out that case and subscribe so you don't miss out on our daily updates.